A great example of this is Picasso. And I watched a documentary about him recently, and what I found from my perspective when I was watching is that he was constantly trying to prove himself that he was, this amazing Renaissance artist. He could do the classical, paintings and everything, and he could do a great job at being a copycat. But when he got to the point where he was confident who he was and created his own skill and used his own skill, then he was able to bend reality, bend the mold of what could be possible. The next thing I want to look here is allowing the mix to breathe. We don't always have to do something. Sometimes we need to allow the mix to breathe. A great example of this is knowing when we have a lot of information in a piece. What I mean by that is if you have the kicks, the snares, the vocals, and other stuff happening, you have some synths, okay? Sometimes leaving it alone is your best practice. There's some moments here when we do just that.
Oh, I just hate being without you. It's just another thing to break through.
Okay, let me just clarify here. So again, we're just checking with the cue, with some of the effects I want to add in and stuff like that. Is it going to work? It's not going to work. Doing this mix with elements or experimenting as we go and just trying things out and being very open to just thinking as we go to keep it as genuine as possible. Sometimes you're not really sure if an effect's going to work or it isn't going to work. So you need to just really listen to it in your headphones and see if certain things work. I know that the trance effect, for example, very powerful effect, but sometimes it might not work in a certain piece. Sometimes it will. So listening to it beforehand, figuring out with your cue points if something's going to work is really crucial. And if you have your headphones, use them.
Carry the hurt I dare not speak it. Bring up the love that we're all.
When we use effects, they don't have to be just for the builds. They can be for just emphasizing certain moments, okay? And creating a bit of a unique moment, a unique atmosphere, and then allowing the track to breathe, okay? What we're doing here is playing with a fader, adding a bit of a flutter, just having a bit of fun with the song. See how I mentioned that the trance effect, they're very, very powerful if you're not careful. I've experimented with using very fast cycles and using slower ones. 4th, the 8th, they seem to work the best. Any quicker than that, it seems to sort of, it's too intense. See how we have a section where we're really pounding down with effects. We're adding, we're playing with the channel fader, we're adding other effects, we're creating an atmosphere for the transition of the first piece. A bunch of stuff is happening. Then we're also pausing, which is an intense moment, and then we're bringing the next song. And then for me to then just keep pounding down effects in this kind of moment, it's going to be too much. It's going to be off-putting. That's something you want to take into consideration. So sometimes it isn't about how complex you can make something. It's about doing what you think is best in the moment. Okay, it's very easy to make things complex, but knowing when to simplify things, knowing when just to leave it alone, that's very, very important. I look at it almost like mixes when you have the 4 decks and it looks impressive, but very few people know how to use the 4 decks to the absolute best. And for a lot of people, it's just for show and it just sits there. There's nothing wrong with having 2 decks, but being really good at what you're doing in transitioning between the two. And when you're able to separate yourself from wanting to show off and being confident in the skills that you have, then you can push yourself forward to create art rather than trying to sort of prove something to someone else. A great example of this is Picasso. And I watched a documentary about him recently, and what I found from my perspective when I was watching is that he was constantly trying to prove himself that he was, this amazing Renaissance artist. He could do the classical, paintings and everything, and he could do a great job at being a copycat. But when he got to the point where he was confident who he was and created his own skill and knew his own skill, then he was able to bend reality, bend the mold of what could be possible. And instead of having that the vanishing point, I believe it's called, in paintings you have a centralized point where you can make things expand and create that distance and create depth to the picture. And when he was able to say, okay, we're gonna just, screw all that, and we're gonna have all these wacky designs and stuff like that. That's when you're creating your own unique style. You look at someone like Picasso, some of the work looks like a 5-year-old did it. It's absolutely genius because they have someone who has the confidence to paint the work that he wants to paint, no matter what anyone thinks. That's why he's so unique, and that's why he became who he was, because he was able to have confidence in his own art. And he didn't even care what anyone else thought, or the fact that it looks like a kid did it. It didn't matter, because that was his perspective of what he wanted to create. That's the art in that moment that he wanted to share. Sure, in the early works may have required great skill and finesse. When you look at his later works, man, it's just, brush. It's done with such ease that you see a master work. You see someone who's confident and has gotten to that point where they realize that simplicity in their work shows great mastery over any technical skill that they can put into their work. It's about the emotions, about the feeling. When we look at it from a musical perspective, we need to remember that we listen to music because of the feeling it gives us, because of the vibe it gives us, the emotion. Not because, the DJ, did this, did that, they added all these effects in, and then, oh my God. We need to look at from the perspective, add effects, create transitions, create these moments, but from an emotional perspective, from a creative, from a musical perspective. Adding 3 or 4 different things together and then doing this and doing that, cool. But if we don't create an emotion, if there's no vibe to that, I don't really see the point in it. And that's just from one artist's perspective to another. And with that sort of rant, when we take that in consideration, create these sort of big brush strokes, and we do this technique, do that technique, and we add this effect, add this color with that color, we do this Renaissance technique with this, we might add that technique, we do an old school technique like this, or we do that, cool, no worries. The key is we're complementing, adding something, we're adding emotion to the piece, okay? So we're adding that quick fader cut. We're detuning the song a little bit, we're creating a different vibe to the music. Instead of being like, going, I'm creating that tension for it. So instead of it being just like, like this, it's sort of like, zoom. Instead of it being just like there, we're throwing, the blue, we're throwing the red, we're getting the brush, just going, shoo, so seeing what works and putting it all together, and there you go. Almost like that Weeping Woman from that Picasso. One of my favorite paintings from Picasso, the Weeping Woman. If you haven't seen it, absolutely phenomenal piece of art.